Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ and a theology professor. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. Today we're on day 112 or 112. We're covering Unitatis Redintegratio 10 to 12 on Ecumenism's goal being all confessing Christ. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday we spoke about the need to pray for unity. This prayer can be with other Christians, but only in shared prayers, not communion, and study and dialogue is key for ecumenism. Today we're going to finish chapter 2 on the practice of ecumenism, and the summary of what we're going to cover is we need to teach other Christians' teachings accurately, express our own teachings with truth and clarity, charity, well, clarity too, I guess, but I wrote charity, and we need to cooperate with other Christians. So let's go on with chapter 10, paragraph 10. Paragraph 10 has 4 subparagraphs. We'll read them A, B, then C, D. A and B talk about the need to teach other Christians theology honesty, and C and D talk about priests needing to teach, priests teaching others and knowing local non-Christians. Because the type of local non-Catholics, the type of non-Catholic Christians in the area is going to vary a lot based on where you are in the world, right? So let's read 10a. Sacred theology and other branches of knowledge, especially of a historical nature, must be taught in due regard with the ecumenical point of view so that they may correspond more exactly with the facts. B. It is most important that future shepherds and priests should have mastered a theology that has been carefully worked out in this way and not polemically, especially with regard to those aspects which concern the relations of separated brethren with the Catholic Church. Right, so here we need to do not just the good research we talked about yesterday, but we need to express in our teaching, right? That's important, right? In that sense, right? And there's an important aspect for teaching, priests and shepherds, right? I know this hits home to me, being a theology professor in a seminary, that's something I have to think about, right? So if I'm teaching you the Eucharist, for example, I have to make sure I accurately and charitably express Protestant views of the Eucharist, right? And Orthodox views of the Eucharist, which are relatively the same as Catholic, although they're developed in slightly different ways of expressing them. But they're Orthodox and Catholic views are compatible much more than either of them with the Protestant views of the Eucharist, for example. And then don't be just polemical. Now, this doesn't forbid all polemics. It is good to point out, say I'm talking about the Eucharist again, to say, hey, here's why this Lutheran or this Presbyterian or this Baptist view of the Eucharist doesn't seem to work as well as the Catholic view, right? But not to be just like, oh, it's wrong, but to start by saying, hey, this is what they believe, and this is why they believe, and this is how they understand it. So moving on to C and D, it talks about how priests teach others and how we know local non-Catholic Christians. So 10c. This importance is the greater because the instruction and spiritual formation of the faithful and of religious depends so largely on the formation which their priests have received. D. Moreover, Catholics engaged in missionary work in the same territories as other Christians ought to know, particularly in these times, the problems and benefits in their own apostles which derive from the ecumenical movement. Right? So we as priests are, in a way, teachers of others, right? This is a podcast where I've been teaching you all year, right? And this is a special importance, right? This is why that previous paragraph was talking, hey, it's particularly important to teach priests this, right? And that's important. It talks about missionary territories and see how ecumenism and trying to bring people to Christianity overall, not just getting so much in fights where you divide it, is important. But I also think this number, although it doesn't explicitly talk about it, is also important for seeing how different Protestant groups or non-Catholic Christian groups are in the area and understanding them particularly well, right? For example, if I'm teaching the Trinity and I'm teaching the U.S. or Canada, I think I'd explain the Mormon Trinitarian heresy. But if I was teaching in Europe, because Mormons are much less prevalent, I don't think I'd explain it because the Mormon Trinitarian heresy is a little odd. I'm not going to go into it here because it's not something that's super quick, like one line to explain. You can Google it if you're really interested. right, for that, right? And so we can know where we agree and where we differ about the Protestants who are working as missionaries there or the Protestants who are working at kind of an established church there, like whichever way you want to view the U.S., because the U.S. and Canada are both kind of established and kind of missionary territory now. So let's move on to paragraph 11. Again, we have 3 subparagraphs. We're going to read A and B and then C. A and B talk about we need to explain Catholic doctrine well in ecumenism, and C is about how we need to explain teaching with truth and charity and humility too, it mentioned. Anyway, so 11A, the way and method in which the Catholic faith is expressed should never become an obstacle to dialogue with our brethren. It is, of course, essential that the doctrine should be clearly presented in its entirety. Nothing is so foreign to the spirit of ecumenism as a false Irenicism. That's one of those words where I've seen written, so I know what it means, but I've not pronounced it, really. So, a false Irenicism, in which the purity of Catholic doctrine suffers loss and its genuine certain meaning is clouded. So, Irenicism is obviously that kind of watering down of it, kind of, and the lack of saying that, right? Because they explain it right afterwards there. Anyway, so 11b. At the same time, the Catholic faith must be explained more profoundly and precisely, in such a way and in such terms that our separated brethren can also be really understood. We need to look at how to explain the faith, right? Do we explain it in ways that causes obstacles, or do we explain it in a way that helps them understand, right? So if we go back to the Catholic Lutheran dialogue, a big part of that was, hey, we're going to express Catholic teaching in a way that doesn't break the Lutheran Council, and we're going to explain Lutheran teaching in a way that doesn't break the Catholic Council, right? And so there's a slight difference in emphasis, but with that, we are able to explain it without falling into the heresies of the other's councils, right? So that's important to show, hey, these are closer to each other than we really think, right? And we need to find a way that helps them in explaining it, right? Because it's not so much, you're wrong. No, we have to start off with say, hey, here's where we're right. Here's how we can explain it to you. So hopefully you understand better what we're coming from, and we can understand better what you're coming from. Right? And not to water it down. Obviously, that's what we're getting at with that term, the Irenicism, which I had trouble pronouncing. Right? It's bad to have this fake unity where we're just kind of, we kind of agree and we're just going to agree to disagree on other things. And other things that are important, right? We can agree to disagree on things that aren't that important, right? For example, are donuts or ice cream better? Like some people say one, some people say the other. There's no sin in arguing one of those others, right? And I can have friends where we agree to disagree on that topic. So anyways, let's move to paragraph 11c. We need to explain the teaching with truth and charity. So let's read it. Moreover, in ecumenical dialogue, Catholic theologians, standing fast by the teaching of the Church and investigating the divine mysteries with the separated brethren, must proceed with love for the truth, with charity, and with humility. When comparing doctrines with one another, they should remember that in Catholic doctrine there exists a hierarchy of truths, since they vary in their relation to the fundamental Christian faith. Thus, the way will be opened by which, through fraternal rivalry, all will be stirred to a deeper understanding and a clear presentation of the unfathomable riches of Christ. Right? We have the truth, but there's ways to present it, right? Are we humble or are we triumphalist, right? Are we nice and charitable? Are we always like, oh, you're wrong here, you're wrong there, right? Do we do the fullness of the truth, or just like, kind of, we believe in Jesus, and that's all, right? No, that's not all. There are other things that Jesus taught us that we have to believe in as Catholics. Right? And then remember the hierarchy of truths, because not all truths are absolute, right? So like we have truths, like this is the way we celebrate the Mass. Well, like there's plenty of other rites. Like, if we were able to get a whole bunch of Lutherans or something in by having a Lutheran variation of the Roman Rite, I'd generally be supportive of it, right? If we have these specific Lutheran traditions we want to maintain within the liturgy, yes, that's not that's not directly in the Roman Rite or in Eastern Rite, but that's not like totally contrary to a Catholic understanding, right? And we can often get unities in more core areas, like, we believe in the Trinity, we believe in Jesus' redemptive death, we believe in baptism, things like that, right? And hopefully, following this, explaining this all with truth, charity, and humility, will open all to truth and unity. So finally today, we're going to talk about paragraph 12. And paragraph 12 has no subparagraphs, so we won't mention them. So here we go. Here's the text. Oh, we have to summarize it first before I read the text. It promotes practical cooperation as a kind of ecumenism is what we're talking about here. We're talking about mainly about practical cooperation, things like acts of charity, things like common witness to the hope of Jesus, things like that. So let's read it. Before the whole world, let all Christians confess their faith in the triune God, one and three in the incarnate Son of God, our Redeemer and Lord. Uniting their efforts and with mutual respect, let them bear witness to our common hope, which does not play us false. In these days, when cooperation in social matters is so widespread, all men without exception are called to work together. With much greater reason, all those who believe in God, but most of all Christians in that they bear the name of Christ. Cooperation among Christians vividly expresses the relationship which, in fact, already unites them, and it sets in clear relief the features of Christ the servant. This cooperation, which already has begun in many countries, should be developed more and more, particularly in regions where a social and technological evolution is taking place, be it in a just evaluation of the dignity of the human person, the establishment of the blessings of peace, the application of gospel principles to social life, the advancement of the arts and sciences in a truly Christian spirit, and also the use of various remedies to relieve the afflictions of our times, such as famine and natural disasters, illiteracy and poverty, housing shortages, and the unequal distribution of wealth. All believers in Christ can, through this cooperation, be led to acquire better knowledge and appreciation for one another, and so pave the way to Christian unity. Right, so there is a practical ecumenism in action, not just in this ecumenical dialogue, which we talked about a little more, or not just in prayer, in this practice, right? We start off with this idea of hope, right? 1 Peter 3 says, always be prepared to make a defense to anyone who calls you to account for the hope that is inside you, right? That's what we need to have. We as Christians need to bear witness to the hope of Jesus together. And showing that solidarity shows the body of Christ. And there's so many types of cooperation here, right? There's talking about social things. They're talking about cultural things. They're talking about, things like dignity of the human person, right? So this can be from a political thing to we're all working together pro-life, to a social thing, hey, we're running a homeless shelter, to a cultural thing, right? There's Catholics who work on the Chosen, even though the directors of the Chosen are Protestant. It's perfectly good for Catholic to work there, and they're portraying this person to demonstrate Jesus' life. And it's perfectly fine for Catholics to watch it too, right? And things like that. So those kind of things. And this cooperation can be in many different levels, right? So, for example, Pope Francis and the Russian Orthodox Patriarch signed a kind of cooperation on charitable activities and trying to do certain initiatives back, I forget the year, I think it was in Havana, Cuba, if I remember correctly, or something. And that's one thing. And another thing is, hey, my church, the three churches in this town of 10,000 people are cooperating to do some kind of act of charity, right? Both of them work together like that, right? And it's particularly important here, noted in more advanced societies where they're undergoing this kind of societal application change, right? So anybody who's listening to this is probably in that, or at least most of the people, right? Because most of my listeners I know are Canada, the U.S., Australia, the British Isles, things like that, right? And those are very advanced societies. And ultimately, this practical cooperation is to lead to more appreciation for each other and closer working towards unity. So thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. I do this podcast on a volunteer basis, and my local religious community relies on donations to help pay our bills. If you want to support my community, you can go to patreon.com/frmatthewlc. There's also a link for a one-time donation or for Patreon itself on my own website, frmatthewlc.com. That's just like Father Matthew LC, frmatthewlc.com. And you can also donate to support StarQuest at sqpn.com/give. Tomorrow we're going to continue with the next paragraph of Unitatis Redintegratio 13 on different historical divisions. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which will provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. Go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X for more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan. Amen.